The rain had stopped before dawn, but high meadows still looked drowned. Mud filled the wagon ruts along the main street and gathered in black pools beneath the boardwalks. Water dripped from the roof of the land office in slow, fat drops. Somewhere behind the livery, a mule kicked at a stall door. The sound came again and again, dull and stubborn, as if the animal had understood before any of the people that morning that a locked place could make a creature desperate. Clara Bennett stood beneath the awning of Reverend Miller's chapel and tried not to think about that mule. The borrowed dress pinched beneath her arms. Martha Miller had worked on it until nearly midnight, taking in one seam and letting out another. But the gown had belonged to a shorter woman with a broader chest. The lace scraped Clara's throat whenever she swallowed. One glove had a brown spot near the thumb where the dye had never quite taken. Her boots were not bridal boots at all. They were her ordinary work shoes, polished until the cracked leather shone, and mud had already climbed over the toes. Martha hovered behind her with a handkerchief pressed to her mouth. "You don't have to look at them," she whispered. Clara looked anyway. Men stood beneath the eaves of the hotel and the mercantile. Ranchers, freight haulers, a clerk from the telegraph office, 2 miners still wearing dried clay on their trousers. Some were ashamed enough to keep their hats low. Others watched with the open curiosity people usually reserved for a hanging. At the far end of the street, Silas Thorne waited beside a folding table covered in green felt. Even in wet weather, Silas managed to look dry. His black coat was brushed clean. His boots had been carried over the worst of the street by one of the deputy clerks. He wore pale gloves and a silver watch chain. On the table lay 3 documents, a Bible, a brass inkwell, and a small leather pouch that Clara knew contained gold. Her father stood a little behind him. That was the hardest part. Edwin Bennett had once been a broad-shouldered man who could shoe a horse and mend a windmill before breakfast. Debt had folded him inward. 2 years of bad water, a cattle sickness, and the banknote on the ranch had taken the straightness out of his back. That morning he looked older than his 50 years. He kept both hands on his hat, crushing the brim between his fingers. He had not looked Clara in the face since the night Silas brought the treaty papers to their house. The men in the territorial office called the arrangement the 10th Parallel Settlement. Silas called it a necessary compact. The newspaper in Prescott had called it a courageous experiment in peace. People in High Meadow had another name for it, the barter of the border. A stretch of mountain pasture north of town had been disputed for years. The territorial survey treated it as open land. An Apache ranching family claimed it by older title and continuous use. A railroad syndicate wanted the pass beyond it. Silas Thorne, territorial secretary, land broker, and private investor in nearly everything that moved through the county, had found a solution elegant enough to impress men who would never have to live with it: a marriage. A white settler woman tied by law to the Apache landholder, a household recognized by the territory. A temporary peace among ranchers, tribal leaders, and surveyors, a promise that no soldiers would be called while the arrangement held. The woman had to be unmarried, of legal age, and attached to a family with claims in the valley. Clara's father owed Silas more money than the Bennett ranch was worth. That had settled the matter. The first time Clara saw her name written beside Hanie Ironclouds, she had thought she might be sick on Silas's mahogany desk. She had been in his office, smelling cigar smoke, lamp oil, and wet wool. Silas had spoken for 20 minutes without once asking what she wanted. He spoke of progress. He spoke of rails, markets, schools, civilization. He spoke of saving lives. When Clara finally asked what would happen if she refused, he had leaned back in his chair. "Your father's note comes due Friday." Nothing more. No threat was necessary. Now Friday had come wearing a wedding dress. Reverend Miller stepped onto the chapel porch. His Bible was held so tightly against his chest that his knuckles had gone pale. "It is time," he said. Clara nodded. Her legs felt detached from her body as she crossed the street. Mud sucked at her boots. The hem of the borrowed gown darkened. She could hear breathing beneath the awnings, the scrape of a chair inside the hotel, a child being hushed by his mother. Then hoofbeats came from the northern road. The street went silent. The rider appeared through mist lifting from the low fields. Hanie Ironcloud rode a buckskin mare without hurry. He wore a dark wool coat over buckskin trousers and a blue cotton shirt faded nearly gray. No feathers, no war paint. No dramatic marks of the monster Clara had been warned to expect. He looked like a rancher who had come down from bad country, cold, tired, and unwilling to waste movement. He stopped 10 yards from the table and swung down. The mare stood quietly behind him. Hanie was taller than Clara expected, not enormous, but built through the shoulders and forearms by work rather than display. His hair was tied at the nape. A thin scar crossed one cheek. He carried no visible gun, only a knife at his belt. Silas smiled as though greeting an employee. "Mr. Ironcloud, good. We can conclude this properly." Hanie did not answer. His gaze passed over the officials, the reverend, the spectators, then stopped on Clara. She had expected curiosity, possession, perhaps satisfaction. Instead, he looked at her for only a moment, then lowered his eyes to the mud between them. It was the first kindness anyone had offered her that morning. Reverend Miller began. His voice trembled on the opening prayer. He skipped the words about love. The territorial clerk read the legal clauses. Names, boundaries, conditions of peace, inheritance, recognition of claims. Clara understood perhaps half of it. The language was built to sound impersonal. That made it worse. When asked whether she entered the Union, Clara looked at her father. He was staring at the ground. She could have said no. She knew that. And she knew exactly how many weeks it would take for the Bennett ranch to be seized. How long before her father would be sleeping in the bunkhouse of the man who bought it. How quickly the town would blame her if shooting began in the North Pasture. "Yes," she said. The word barely carried. Reverend Miller turned to Hanie. Hanie's jaw tightened. He said, "I hear, not I do." Silas frowned, but the clerk was already moving the papers forward. Signatures were made. Wax was pressed. The Reverend pronounced what the law had decided. Then Silas opened the leather pouch. Gold struck the felt-covered table with bright, hard clicks. One coin, another, another. Clara felt every sound in her teeth. "This satisfies the Bennett debt and the settlement compensation," Silas announced. "The High Meadow holding remains recognized under the conditions recorded here." He held out the last coin to Hanie. People leaned closer. Hanie looked at the coin, then at Silas. He opened his hand. Silas dropped the gold into it. Hanie turned his palm over. The coin fell into the mud. A few people gasped. Silas's smile vanished. Hanie bent, not for the coin, but for the reins of the second horse tied behind his mare. He led the animal to Clara and stopped several feet away. "You ride?" he asked. It was the first question anyone had asked her that day. "Yes." He nodded once. They left before the crowd decided what to do with its disappointment. For the first mile, Clara expected Hanie to speak. For the second mile, she expected him to give orders. By the third, she had begun to understand that he might not say anything at all. The road climbed away from wet fields into red earth and juniper. Clouds broke apart over the western ridge. The horses moved single file where the trail narrowed, their hooves knocking loose stones into the ravine below. Clara's dress had dried stiff with mud. Her back ached, the stays beneath the gown cut into her ribs. She kept waiting for Hanie to turn and see how poorly she rode in the unfamiliar saddle. He never looked back long enough to embarrass her. When he slowed, it was because the trail steepened. When he stopped, it was at water. Near noon, they reached a creek running dark beneath cottonwood roots. Hanie dismounted and let both horses drink. Clara remained in the saddle because she was not sure her knees would hold if she climbed down. Hanie filled a canteen. He approached only until he could hand it to her without touching her. "Drink." Clara took it. The water was cold enough to hurt her teeth. She drank too fast and coughed. Hanie had already turned away. His hands caught her attention as he checked a strap on the mare, thick palms, saw marks, a scar across one thumb, split nails darkened by dirt that no amount of washing would remove. Those were not the hands Clara had imagined after years of stories about raids and blood. They were carpenter's hands, fence-mending hands. Hands like her father's had once been before the bank, and the bottle took more of him than work did. She hated herself for the comparison, then hated the town for making the comparison feel surprising. They rode again. By late afternoon, pine replaced juniper, the air thinned and sharpened. Clara's fingers went numb inside her gloves. Hanie's shoulders remained steady ahead of her as though he had been cut from the slope itself. The cabin appeared just before sunset. It sat in a high clearing beneath a line of dark pines. A barn stood 30 yards away. Beyond it, fenced pasture rolled toward a ridge streaked with old snow. The house was larger than Clara expected, made from thick logs fitted close together. With a stone chimney and one real glass window, she had imagined dirt floors. She had imagined animal skins, smoke, disorder, something she could point to and say there, "They were right. This is what I have been given to." Instead, she saw stacked firewood cut to equal length, A swept porch, a rain barrel with a fitted lid, a repaired hinge shining with new grease. Hanie dismounted. Clara did the same and nearly fell. He moved toward her by instinct, then stopped before reaching her. She steadied herself on the saddle. Neither mentioned it. Hanie took a key from inside his coat. It was black iron, long and heavy, worn smooth at the bow. He placed it on the porch rail between them. Clara stared at it. "The house," he said. His English was careful, more precise than broken. "Door locks from inside. Bolt too." She looked at him. He pointed toward the barn. "I sleep there." For a moment she thought she had misunderstood. "You built this house?" "Yes, and you are giving it to me?" His expression changed slightly. Not quite impatience, not quite sadness. "I am giving you a door." The words settled between them. Clara picked up the key. It was still warm from his body. Hanie turned away, unharnessed the pack mule, and began carrying supplies toward the barn. He never looked back to see whether she entered. Clara stood on the porch until the last line of sunlight left the ridge. Then she unlocked the door. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, ash, dried sage, and old paper. A cast-iron stove stood near the wall. There was a bed with clean wool blankets, a table, 2 chairs, a washstand, a cupboard fitted so carefully its doors hung straight despite the uneven logs. A small bunch of lavender had been tied above the window, not fresh, last summer's dried nearly gray. On shelves beside the stove sat books. Clara touched the spines one by one. A Bible, Blackstone's Commentaries, an agricultural handbook, a book of poetry with a cracked green cover, 3 ledgers, a primer in English with penciled notes in the margins, a thin volume on water law. She heard a horse snort outside. A lantern moved in the barn. Hanie was making a bed in the hayloft. Clara closed the door. Her hand rested on the key for several seconds before she turned it. The lock clicked, then she slid the bolt. The sound was deeper, a bar of iron settling into place. She waited. No footsteps came to the porch. No hand tested the latch. No voice told her she was foolish. Clara leaned her forehead against the door and breathed. She had slept behind doors before. Her father's house had doors. The Reverend's spare room had a door. Silas's office had doors polished enough to reflect a face. But this was the first door in her life whose lock belonged to her. She cried then, though she had not cried at the wedding, not loudly. She pressed both hands over her mouth and sank onto the floor, still wearing the muddy white dress, while tears ran between her fingers. They were not tears for romance or rescue. Nothing so simple. They came because the man she had been taught to fear had given her the one thing every respectable man in town had refused her: the right to decide who entered the room. The next morning the mountain woke her with an axe. Thud, a pause, crack, thud. Clara opened her eyes to frost feathering the lower corners of the window. The cabin was so cold that her breath showed above the blankets. She reached beneath her pillow and found the key. It had become a habit during the night. Every time the wind moved the branches against the roof, she had touched the key and listened for footsteps. There had been none. She dressed in wool, lit the stove badly, filled the room with smoke, cursed under her breath, and finally got the draft right. Outside, Hanie was splitting cedar. He had removed his coat despite the frost. Each swing of the axe was clean. No wasted motion. Steam rose from his shoulders in the cold. Clara watched from behind the glass. After a while he gathered kindling and came toward the porch. She stepped back instinctively. Hanie did not climb the steps. He left the kindling on a stump beside the porch and walked away. Clara waited until he had returned to the barn before opening the door. The sticks were split thin enough to catch from a single flame. She carried them inside. The second morning he left kindling again. On the third, Clara put half a loaf of bread on the stump. The bread was not good. She had used too much salt, and the crust was hard enough to cut a gum. Still, when she looked an hour later, the loaf was gone. In its place sat a bucket of clean water. That became the shape of their first weeks. Bread for wood, coffee grounds for repaired tack. A folded cloth left on the stump when Hanie's sleeve tore. 2 rabbit carcasses hanging by the pantry after Clara admitted to herself that the beans would not last winter. They spoke rarely. Sometimes days passed without a sentence. Clara learned his routines anyway. He checked the horses before eating. He walked the north fence every 4th day. He sharpened tools on Sunday evenings. He read by lantern in the barn loft, which she discovered only because she saw the yellow light and once glimpsed him with a book open on his knees. He learned hers without entering the house. The water bucket appeared before she needed to ask. A loose shutter was repaired while she kneaded dough. When rain found a seam near the pantry, Hanie climbed the roof in a storm and replaced 3 shakes without knocking. The first time their hands touched happened because of a bathtub. It was a squat oak thing banded in iron, too heavy for Clara to drag over the threshold alone. Hanie hauled it to the porch one evening after rain. He took one handle and she took the other. They lifted, his knuckles brushed hers. Hanie dropped his side so quickly that water sloshed over Clara's boots. He stepped backward into the rain. Clara stared at him. His palms were open, his face tight with something she recognized only after a moment. Fear. Not fear of her. Fear that she would think he had taken what she had not offered. "It was an accident," she said. Hanie nodded. Still, he did not step forward again until she reached for the handle and said, "We'll spill the whole thing if you stand there." He picked it up. Together they carried the tub inside. He left before she shut the door. That night Clara set the key on the table rather than beneath her pillow. She still bolted the door, but the key remained in sight, catching firelight between the sugar jar and a chipped blue cup. A week later, Clara cut her palm on the edge of a tin lid. The wound opened bright and deep. She clamped a cloth around it, angry more than frightened. Blood dripped onto the floor she had scrubbed that morning. Without thinking, she looked toward the window. Hanie was near the corral, repairing a gate. She almost called his name. The word rose to her throat and stopped. She bound the hand herself. That evening when she put bread on the stump, Hanie saw the bandage. He looked at it, then at her. "Deep?" "No." He waited. Clara sighed. "Deep enough." Hanie disappeared into the barn and returned with a small clay jar. "What is it?" she asked. "Pine salve. Clean cloth first. You could have brought it to the door." His gaze flicked toward the cabin. "You did not ask." Clara nearly laughed. It was not funny. That was the strange part. It was so painfully unlike the world, she knew that laughter seemed the only place for the feeling to go. She took the jar. "Thank you." Hanie gave a small nod and walked away. The salve smelled sharp and green. It stung like fire. By morning the throbbing had eased. October slid toward November. Frost stayed later on the grass. Hanie packed straw into cracks in the barn. Clara dried apples near the stove and counted sacks of flour until numbers came to her in dreams. One morning, while scrubbing beside the hearth, her brush struck a floorboard that sounded wrong. Hollow. She tapped it again. The board had no visible nails. Clara fetched a kitchen knife and worked the tip beneath the edge. The plank lifted. Beneath it lay dust, dry moss, and a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Clara stared at the package for a long time before touching it. It was too flat for money and too carefully wrapped for tools. She carried it to the table. Inside was a deed. The paper was thick and yellowed. An old territorial seal had cracked at one side. The date at the bottom read 1865. Clara read it once, then again. The document recognized title to the High Meadow Tract in the name of Hanie's father, with succession recorded to Hanie Ironcloud. 13 years before the 10th parallel settlement. 13 years before Silas told anyone the pasture was disputed public land. Clara sat down slowly. Outside, Hanie's axe struck cedar crack. The sound felt different now. She spread the deed across the table and followed the boundary description with her finger. Creek bed, northern ridge, stone marker, lower grazing basin. The document included the pass Silas's railroad syndicate wanted. The marriage was not meant to establish Hanie's claim. His claim already existed. The marriage was meant to trap it. Clara remembered clauses from the ceremony: inheritance, probate, territorial administration of property passing through a citizen spouse. If Hanie died, the land would pass through her, and her father's debts belonged to Silas. The room seemed to tilt. Clara had believed she had been traded to create peace. Now she understood she had been inserted into a chain of ownership. She was not the end of Silas's scheme. She was the hinge. The axe outside stopped. Clara jumped. She folded the deed too quickly and nearly tore it. She wrapped it in the oilcloth, shoved it beneath her apron, then changed her mind. Not the floor. If Silas knew it existed, the floor was the first place he would search. She lifted the lid of the flour bin, buried the packet beneath 2 sacks, then poured loose flour over the seam. When Hanie came to the porch, he left an armful of wood beside the door. Clara watched him through the glass. He was thinner than when they arrived. Winter work had sharpened his face. An old limp showed when he was tired. He glanced at the window. For 1 second, their eyes met. Clara wanted to open the door and put the deed in his hands. She did not. Trust was growing between them, but it was still a thing with new roots. She did not know how he would receive a hidden document from the woman Silas Thorne had placed in his house. She did not know whether he had hidden it himself, whether it had belonged to his father, whether he believed it lost, so she waited. That night she bolted the door and lay awake listening to the mountain harden under frost. The key was on the table. The deed was under flour. In the barn, a lantern burned until well after midnight. 3 people, Clara thought, were keeping watch over High Meadow now: Hanie, herself, and the truth Silas Thorne had buried beneath the floor. The first hard freeze came 3 nights later. Clara woke before dawn because the stove had gone quiet. Cold had worked through the cabin while she slept. The water in the wash basin wore a skin of ice. Frost traced white fern shapes along the window. When Clara crossed the floor, the boards bit through her stockings. She fed cedar into the stove, then stood at the window while the fire caught. There was no smoke above the barn. She waited. Usually Hanie was moving before sunrise. She knew the sound of the stall door, the short scrape of his shovel, the first blow of the axe. That morning there was nothing. Clara opened the door. The air struck her face hard enough to make her eyes water. She found Hanie in the hayloft stuffing straw into gaps along the north wall. His blanket lay rolled near a support post. It was thin, too thin for the cold that had settled into the boards. He looked down when she climbed halfway up the ladder. "You need something?" Clara had brought her thick wool blanket from home. It was the only thing her mother had woven before dying that Clara still possessed. Brown, heavy, ugly in the way useful things often were. She had slept under it every winter of her childhood. She held it up. For the loft. Hanie's eyes moved from the blanket to her face. "No." Clara stared at him. "No, you use it. I have 2 blankets in the house. You will need 3. You're sleeping in a barn with wind coming through the wall." He pushed another fistful of straw into a crack. "I have hides. They are stiff enough to stand by themselves." A flicker of amusement passed over his face so quickly Clara almost missed it. Still warm. She climbed 1 more rung and set the blanket on the floor. "If you put it back on my porch, I will bring it again." Hanie looked at the blanket, then at Clara. "You are stubborn. My father says so. Your father traded you." The words were quiet, not cruel. Clara's fingers tightened on the ladder. "Yes," she said. "He did." Hanie looked away first. Clara descended. That evening she saw the brown blanket wrapped around his shoulders as he read beneath the lantern. She returned to the cabin before he could notice her watching. The mountain held its cold for 5 days, then the sky changed. Hanie saw it before Clara did. He spent an afternoon moving hay from the lower shed, checking roof braces, and carrying more wood to the cabin. He brought in sacks of grain and stacked them along the barn wall. Before dark, he hammered an extra brace across the west barn door. Clara came out with a pan of cornbread. "What are you doing?" "Storm. The sky is clear." Hanie pointed north. A thin gray line lay between 2 distant peaks. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "Tonight." Clara looked at the clear stars. "You can tell from that?" "The horses told me first." She looked toward the corral. The animals stood close together, rumps to the wind. By midnight, the world disappeared. Snow did not fall so much as travel sideways. It hissed against the window, like thrown sand. Wind pushed smoke down the chimney until Clara had to open the stove vent and wrap a wet cloth around the seam. The cabin groaned in its joints. She slept in a chair wearing her dress and boots. At dawn there was no dawn, only a paler shade of gray. The storm continued. Clara opened the door 6 inches and found snow packed halfway up the porch steps. She could not see the barn. She shut the door. All day she fed the stove and listened. She imagined Hanie beneath the brown blanket in the loft. She imagined him laughing at the storm. She imagined the roof coming down. By evening, worry had become a physical ache behind her breastbone. She put a kettle on the stove, though there was no reason to boil water. The kettle gave her something to watch. On the second day, the wind grew worse. A shutter tore loose from the west window and slammed against the wall until Clara tied it from inside. Snow forced itself beneath the door in thin white tongues. She could no longer pretend the barn was safe. She stood with her hand on the bolt for nearly an hour. Open the door, she thought. Then, he has not asked. Then he should not have to. Near sunset she saw a light. A dim amber glow appeared where the barn loft should be. It swayed once, twice, vanished behind blowing snow, then returned. Relief loosened Clara's shoulders. The light disappeared again. This time it did not return. She waited 5 minutes. 10. The storm struck the cabin hard enough to shake soot from the stovepipe. Clara grabbed her coat. She tucked the iron key into her pocket out of habit, then stopped with her hand still inside the fabric. It felt absurd. She was about to walk into a blizzard to find the man she had spent months locking out, and still she was carrying the key. She took it anyway. Outside, the snow reached above her knees. Wind stole the breath from her mouth. She tied a rope around her waist and the porch post because Hanie had once told her never to cross open ground in whiteout without a line back. Hanie! The storm shredded the name. She moved by memory. 12 steps to the stump, 20 more to the water trough. Angle left toward the barn. The rope pulled tight behind her. She untied it from her waist, looped it around the trough, and continued. The barn door had broken partially free. It banged against the frame with each gust. Clara found Hanie on his knees beside the lower hinge. At first she thought he was working. Then he leaned sideways and did not catch himself. She pushed through the snow to him. Hanie. His eyes opened. Unfocused. You go back, he said. No, cold, I noticed. He tried to stand and failed. Clara touched his cheek. His skin burned beneath a crust of ice. Fever. She looked at the barn, at the half-open door, at snow blowing across the stalls. The horses were pressed together in the far corner. Hanie had spent himself trying to secure the door rather than save his own strength. Clara slipped his arm across her shoulders. Up. He shook his head. Up, damn you. Hanie managed 1 foot beneath him. They lurched toward the cabin. He outweighed her by at least 60 pounds. Twice they fell. Once Clara lost a glove and could not find it. Snow filled her sleeve. Hanie tried to pull away, mumbling that he would not enter. Clara slapped his chest. I am inviting you. He looked at her as if the words did not fit the storm. The house, she said. I am inviting you into the house. After that, he stopped resisting. They reached the porch by following the rope. Clara shoved the door open and dragged Hanie across the threshold. Snow blew in around them. She kicked the door shut, turned the key, and threw the bolt. For several seconds, they lay on the floor breathing. Then work began. Clara stripped off Hanie's wet coat and boots. She cut the laces when her fingers were too numb to untie them. His shirt clung to his skin. Beneath it, his body carried scars she had never seen. Old bullet wounds, a long pale line beneath the ribs, puckered marks across one shoulder, thin parallel stripes down his back. She looked away, not from disgust, but because she understood suddenly that seeing could be another kind of trespass. Hanie shivered violently. Stay awake, she told him, his teeth knocked together. She heated water, wrapped warm stones in cloth, and placed them near his feet. She rubbed his hands until her own palms hurt. She used the brown blanket over him and every other blanket in the cabin. Hours passed. At some point, Hanie began to speak. Not to her. He was counting. 37, he whispered. Black calf by the west fence. 38. Red cow. 39. Clara leaned closer. He kept counting cattle through the fever. No battle, no revenge, no secret Apache war chant, as men in town would have invented if they could see him. Cattle. He worried about the herd freezing. Clara pressed a damp cloth to his forehead. The fences are there, she said. The animals are together. You did what you could. 42, you can count them tomorrow. His hand closed weakly around her wrist. Clara froze. Hanie's eyes remained shut. Father, he murmured. His grip loosened. Clara stayed beside him. The stove burned through most of the wood Hanie had stacked for her. When the pile ran low, she broke a chair rung for kindling and fed the fire a cracked pantry shelf. Near morning, the fever began to fall. Clara woke in the rocking chair to a scrape near the door. Hanie was sitting up. He looked terrible. His face was gray with exhaustion. His hair hung loose over his shoulders. One hand braced against the floor. His eyes found the door, then the bolt, then Clara. The shame on his face angered her. You nearly froze to death. I came inside. I dragged you. I should go. No. Hanie stopped. Clara stood. Every muscle protested. You cannot walk to the barn. I can. You cannot walk to that table without falling over. He began to rise anyway. Clara put one hand against his shoulder. The contact startled them both. Hanie went perfectly still. Clara did not remove her hand. You gave me the key, she said. Remember? He nodded once. So I decide who crosses the door. His gaze met hers. Clara swallowed. I have decided you stay until you are well. Hanie sank back against the wall. A small breath left him. Not surrender. Relief, perhaps. Clara walked to the flour bin. She knew before she lifted the lid that she was going to show him the deed. The timing was wrong. Everything about their lives had been badly timed. That seemed reason enough. She dug through the flour, pulled out the oilcloth, and laid the document on the table. Hanie saw the seal. His expression changed. He did not ask where she found it. He reached for the paper with both hands. For the first time since Clara had known him, those hands trembled. My father, he said. You knew it existed. I knew there was a paper. He hid it when soldiers came through. After he died, I could not find it. Clara sat opposite him. Why did you agree to the treaty if you knew the land was yours? Hanie looked at the deed for a long time. Because ownership on paper and ownership under a gun are not the same. Clara waited. He spoke slowly, choosing words with care. His father had filed the claim with an earlier territorial office after years of running cattle in the high basin. The deed had been recognized by one administration and ignored by the next. When surveyors came for the railroad route, Silas claimed the document had no valid registry copy. Hanie challenged him. Silas answered with grazing restrictions, tax notices, and armed deputies. The Apache families using nearby land had already lost water rights through similar papers. Then Silas offered peace. A marriage to a citizen woman would make the property easy for territorial courts to handle. Washington officials liked the appearance of assimilation. Local ranchers liked the promise of no raids or retaliation. Hanie accepted because refusing would have brought soldiers, and because the tribal elders asked him to buy time. And me? Clara asked. Hanie's mouth tightened. You were the part I would not agree to. But you did. They told me you volunteered. Clara laughed once, without humor. Of course they did. Hanie looked at her. They said your father's land bordered ours. They said you wanted the fighting to stop. My father's ranch is 40 miles south. I learned that after the papers were signed. Clara pressed her palms flat on the table. Silas had lied to both of them. The simplicity of it was almost insulting. She traced the inheritance clause on the deed with one finger. If you die, the treaty sends this land through me, yes, and my father's debt belongs to Silas, yes, so he can come after me. Hanie nodded. Clara sat back, the stove ticked as iron cooled between logs. Then he never expected this marriage to last. No, did you? Hanie's eyes lifted. There it was. The question she had not intended. He answered without softness. I expected you to leave when you could. Clara looked toward the door. Where would I go? Anywhere you choose. She almost snapped that women like her did not have anywhere. Then she remembered the key. Hanie had never promised her a life. He had promised a door. It was more honest than anything else she had been given. The blizzard trapped them together for 4 more days. At first, Hanie slept on the floor near the door, despite Clara's insistence that the bed was wide enough for a sick man and a woman who could place a chair between them if necessary. He refused. On the second night, Clara threw a pillow at him. You are making me look cruel. Hanie caught the pillow against his chest. You worry what people think? No. I worry about waking to find you dead because your pride is colder than the floor. Something like a smile appeared. He slept on the rug with 2 blankets instead of 1. They talked because the storm made work small and time large. Not about feelings, not about marriage. They spoke of things that could be held. Hanie told her which cattle were likely to calve early. Clara told him how to stretch flour with ground corn. He showed her how to read the cloud line above the eastern ridge. She corrected his written spelling in the supply ledger. He corrected her not when she tried to mend a halter. On the 3rd evening, he took Whitman from the shelf. You read poetry? Clara asked. My mother liked that one. Your mother read English? She read better than my father. He thought poetry was a poor use of paper. Clara smiled. My father thought novels made women dissatisfied. Did they? Yes. Hanie considered that. Then perhaps he was right. Clara laughed. This time Hanie did too. His laugh surprised her. It was low and brief, a sound unused to the room. The storm passed in the night. Morning revealed a new world. Snow buried the fence posts. The barn roof sagged under white weight but held. One section of corral had collapsed. Hanie tried to go outside before breakfast. Clara blocked the door with a shovel. You still have fever. Not much. Fever does not become harmless because there is less of it. The cattle will benefit greatly if you die in front of them. Hanie stared at her. Clara stared back. He sat down. 2 hours later they went together. The work was brutal. They shoveled a path to the barn, freed the doors, checked hooves, broke ice in the trough. Hanie moved slowly, and Clara took the heavier shovel whenever she saw his arms begin to shake. He noticed. He did not thank her. She was glad. By afternoon they reached the corral. A red heifer had calved during the storm. The calf lay beneath its mother, alive and furious, bawling whenever snow touched its nose. Hanie crouched beside it. 43, he said. Clara remembered the fever count. You were 1 short. He looked at her. The calf makes 43. Then you were counting ahead. A smile tugged at his mouth. Good ranching. They carried the calf to shelter together. That evening Clara made cornmeal with milk from a cow that had somehow survived the storm without losing her temper. She set 2 bowls on the table. Hanie put on his coat. Clara looked at him. "Where are you going, barn?" "The barn roof leaks. I fixed it. You are still coughing. It will stop." Clara set down the spoon. Hanie's gaze moved to the iron key on the table. For months it had been the center of every boundary between them. Clara walked to the door. She slid the bolt back. Then she left it open. Cold air entered in a thin line around the frame. She returned to the stove and ladled the food. Hanie remained standing. Clara did not look at him. "I made too much," she said. "That is a lie. I have been told novels make women dishonest." Silence. Then Hanie removed his coat. He hung it on the peg. The sound of the wooden peg taking the weight of his coat was almost nothing. Clara felt it more strongly than the wedding bell. They ate across from each other. When they finished, Hanie carried the bowls to the wash basin. He did not ask whether he could stay the night. Clara did not tell him to leave. He spread his bedding near the hearth. The key remained on the table. The door stayed unbolted until Clara went to bed. Before turning in, she paused with her hand on the iron bar. Hanie lay with his back toward her, giving her privacy even in sleep. Clara slid the bolt into place, not against him, against the weather, against Silas, against anyone who believed a piece of paper entitled him to enter. In the morning, Hanie was already outside when she woke. His bedding was rolled neatly by the wall. On the table, beside the key, he had left a small wooden box. Inside were 2 new hinges for the west shutter, a sharpened sewing needle, and a folded square of paper. The paper contained a map of the high meadow boundary, drawn in Hanie's careful hand. At the bottom he had written 3 words, "Know what is yours." Clara read them twice. Then she tucked the map inside the oilcloth with the deed. Winter held the mountain another 2 months. They stopped measuring their days by who slept where. Some nights Hanie used the barn when weather was mild and work ran late. Some nights he stayed on the rug. Once, during a week of bitter wind, Clara woke to find him asleep at the table over a tax ledger, his head resting on crossed arms. She covered his shoulders with the brown blanket and went back to bed. Neither mentioned it. He taught her to use the Winchester, not because he expected trouble, he said, but because anyone living that far from town should know what to do when a cat came near the calves or a drunk rider ignored a gate. The first shot bruised Clara's shoulder and missed the target by 3 feet. Hanie did not laugh. The second missed by 1. By the end of the week, she could hit a tin plate at 40 yards. "Again," he said, "my shoulder is purple. Then you will remember it." She fired again. He was right. She taught him to make biscuits that did not resemble flat stones. He claimed the first batch was fine. Clara broke one against the table edge. It made a knocking sound. Hanie looked at the biscuit. "Then at her strong," he said. She laughed until she had to sit down. The laughter changed the cabin more than furniture could have. By February, they had begun using the word home without noticing. "I left the hammer at home. We need salt for home. The south window at home is leaking." The first time Clara heard herself say it, she stopped in the middle of tying a feed sack. Hanie did not react, but later that day he repaired the porch step that had been loose since autumn. By March, snow began to soften along the southern slopes. Water ran beneath crusted drifts. The horses rolled in mud. Clara opened the door in the afternoons to let damp, earthy air push out months of smoke. Spring smelled like rot before it smelled like flowers. One evening they stood on the porch listening to water rush through the creek below. Hanie leaned against the rail. Clara shelled beans into a bowl. "Silas will come," he said. She did not ask how he knew. The mountain was opening. Roads would become passable. Men who had left them alone in the snow would remember the land beneath it. Clara looked at the barn, the repaired fence, the pasture emerging piece by piece. What will he do? First talk, and after that? Hanie watched the lower trail. Whatever his talking cannot buy. Clara set the bowl on the porch rail. Inside the cabin, beneath flour and cloth, lay the deed. On the table sat the iron key. For the first time, neither object frightened her. They were simply tools. One proved the land had a history. The other proved a door had an owner. And Clara had learned through winter that ownership meant nothing if you could not choose what to do with it. A week later, hoofbeats rose from the thawing road. 2 riders came through the pines. Silas Thorne rode first. Behind him came Gideon Vance, a gunman Clara recognized from town by the way people stopped speaking when he entered a room. Hanie was in the yard with a pitchfork. Clara stood on the porch. The key was in her pocket. Silas smiled as though he had come to collect rent. Silas stopped his horse where the yard turned to mud. He looked irritated by the mud, which pleased Clara more than it should have. Gideon Vance remained in the saddle. He was a narrow man with pale eyes and a mustache trimmed too carefully for someone who slept outdoors. His coat hung open enough to show a revolver on one hip and another holster beneath his arm. Silas removed one glove finger by finger. "Clara, Mr. Thorne." He glanced at her skirt, boots, and windburned face. "My word, mountain life has changed you. You look the same." Silas paused. Hanie's mouth moved slightly, but he kept his eyes on the pitchfork. Silas recovered his smile. "We were concerned. The winter reports were dreadful. Roads closed for weeks. 3 ranches lost stock. I came personally to see whether the settlement remains. Workable. Workable for whom?" The smile thinned. "For everyone, naturally." Gideon looked toward Hanie. Hanie leaned the pitchfork against the corral and wiped his hands on his trousers. Silas acted as if he had not seen him. "That cabin belongs to the settlement household," he said. "I should inspect it." Clara stayed at the top of the steps. "No." Silas looked up. "What did you say?" "You said you came to see whether I was alive." "You have seen me." "Clara, there are legal obligations. Do you have a warrant?" The question came from Hanie. His voice was calm. Silas turned at last. The 2 men looked at each other for the first time that morning. "A warrant?" Silas repeated. "You speak of law," Hanie said. "Bring law." Gideon's hand drifted toward his belt. Clara came down 1 step. Hanie did not move. Silas gave a small laugh. "Primitive notions the difficulty." "Clara, may I speak with you alone?" "No." Silas's face changed. The winter had taught Clara how much men revealed when silence lasted longer than they expected. She let him stand in it. Finally he said, "I have news regarding your father." That reached her. Silas saw it. He smiled again. "Perhaps we could speak inside." Clara hated him for knowing which thread to pull. She looked at Hanie. He gave no signal, no command. He simply waited. That, more than anything, steadied her. Clara opened the door. "5 minutes," she said to Silas. "The door stays open." Silas climbed the steps. As he passed Hanie, he smelled faintly of jasmine hair oil and cigar smoke. The scent filled the cabin with town. Clara disliked how quickly it made the room feel smaller. Silas took off his hat and looked around. His gaze stopped on the books, then the second bowl drying near the washstand, then the brown blanket folded by the hearth. "You have become domestic. I was always capable of work, not this kind." Clara did not answer. Silas moved closer to the table. "Your father has lost the ranch." The words hit exactly where he intended. Clara kept her face still. "When?" "January. Where is he?" "Boarding with your aunt in Tucson." "I arranged it." "Of course he had." "Is he ill?" "Not seriously." "Does he drink?" Silas looked toward the open door. "That is a private family matter." "So is this house." His eyes returned to her. "Your father is ashamed." Clara thought of Edwin standing in the mud with his hat crushed in both hands. "Good," she said. Silas blinked. Clara surprised herself too. She felt grief, anger, pity, and a child's old longing to repair her father's disappointment. But beneath all of it was a simple fact. He had chosen his debt over her. Silas had expected the old wound to reopen and make her obedient. It did not. He changed tactics. "This arrangement has served its purpose," he said. "The territory remained quiet through winter. There is no reason for you to remain here indefinitely." Clara folded her arms. "You wrote indefinite into the marriage certificate. A contract signed under extraordinary circumstances can be dissolved. Then dissolve it." Silas smiled. "That requires cooperation." There it was. "What kind?" Clara asked. He lowered his voice. "The land must pass cleanly." Clara made herself look confused. Silas studied her face. "The High Meadow claim has become complicated. Ironclad's presence prevents the territory from settling title. If he were no longer an obstacle, the property would pass to you under the treaty. You could sign it over. Your father's debts disappear. You return to town free." Clara heard Hanie moving outside. A horse snorted. Leather creaked. She thought of the deed under the flower. "What do you mean, no longer an obstacle?" Silas reached inside his coat. He placed a small blue glass vial on the table. The sound was delicate. That made Clara's stomach turn. "A few drops," he said. "No taste. Fever, weakness, sleep. Mountain winters take men every year." For a moment Clara could not breathe. Silas mistook her silence for horror at the act itself rather than horror at him. He softened his voice. "I would never ask this if there were another clean path." "Clean. The alternative is enforcement. Vance has men available. If Ironclad resists an official order, there will be shooting. Perhaps the cabin burns. Perhaps you are injured. This avoids violence. Clara looked at the vial. She remembered Silas describing the wedding as a way to avoid violence. His peace always required someone else to bleed quietly. She let her shoulders sag. Silas watched closely. "I'm tired," she whispered. His eyes brightened. Clara hated how easy he was to fool once she gave him the version of herself he preferred. "So tired," she continued. "The cold, the work. I thought I could bear it." Silas moved closer. "You don't have to. I want to go home." He touched her sleeve with his gloved fingers. "Then make a new home." Clara lowered her eyes. "How long?" 3 days. Vance returns at dawn on the 4th. If the matter is settled, he escorts you safely to town. If not. Silas let the sentence die. Clara nodded. She picked up the vial. It felt light enough to contain nothing. Silas smiled with deep satisfaction. "Your father always said you were sensible." Clara closed her fingers around the glass. "My father said many things." Silas left believing he had won. Gideon remained a moment longer. He looked at Clara, then at Hanie. Unlike Silas, Gideon seemed to understand that something in the yard did not match the plan. "You sleep in the house now?" he asked Hanie. Hanie did not answer. Gideon's gaze dropped to the open door. Clara stepped into the frame. "I asked him to." Gideon looked at her again. Silas called from the trail. Vance tipped his hat and rode after him. Clara waited until the hoofbeats disappeared. Then she shut the door. Hanie stood in the yard. She could see him through the window, still facing the lower road. Clara placed the blue vial beside the key. For a long moment she stared at the two objects. One had been given to her so she could say no. The other had been given so Silas could make her say yes. She picked up the vial and went to the barn. Hanie was sharpening a knife by lantern light. Clara stopped inside the door. He looked at the vial in her hand. No surprise showed on his face. That frightened her more than anger would have. "You knew?" "I knew he would offer something." "Poison?" "Maybe money, maybe a horse, maybe a story about your father." Clara sat on an overturned bucket. He used all three, except the horse. Hanie set the whetstone down. She told him everything. She did not soften the part where she pretended to agree. When she finished, Hanie reached for the vial. Clara handed it to him. He pulled the cork, smelled it, and immediately held it away. "Arsenic?" Clara asked. "Not sure, something bitter under the oil. It is supposed to be tasteless." Silas lies. "Yes." Hanie recorked the bottle and set it in a tin box. "Do not pour it out. Why? Evidence." Clara looked at him. "You sound like Blackstone." "My mother liked law more than poetry." "You told me she liked Whitman. She liked both." Clara rubbed her face. "What do we do?" Hanie stood and walked to the dirt center aisle. With the tip of his knife, he drew the cabin, barn, creek, and tree line. "Vance comes before dawn. Men here, maybe Ridge." Silas said 3 days. "He wants you to believe you have 3 days." Clara's mouth went dry. Hanie pointed toward the lower road. "He may wait 1, maybe 2, not 3. Then we need law." Hanie gave her a look. "The law married us. The territorial law did." She thought of the deed seal. "What about federal marshals?" Hanie crouched beside the map. "Too far. Martha's cousin works at the postal station in Cottonwood. 2 days' ride. There is a timber camp east of the ridge. Their supply wagon goes down every Tuesday." Hanie looked up. "How do you know?" "I listen when you buy salt." A pause. Then he nodded. "We make a copy." They spent the evening at the table. Clara copied the deed by hand, line for line, while Hanie read the original against her work. It took hours. The legal description alone filled 2 pages. Her fingers cramped. Ink stained the side of her hand. They enclosed the copy with a letter to Martha Miller. Clara wrote plainly. Silas Thorne had offered poison. He had threatened armed enforcement. The High Meadow deed predated the treaty. If anything happened to Clara or Hanie, Martha was to place the letter before a federal marshal, not the territorial office. She hesitated over the final line. Hanie sat across from her, cleaning the rifle. "What?" he asked. Clara dipped the pen again. "I am deciding whether to trust her. Do you?" "I don't know." Hanie waited. Clara wrote. "You told me once kindness without power was all you had. I am asking you to use whatever power you can find." She sanded the ink and folded the pages. Before dawn, Hanie rode east. He returned at noon with mud to his knees. "Wagon took it," he said. To Cotton he nodded. Clara let out a breath. Now all they could do was prepare. Hanie checked the rifle ports beneath the loft eaves. He moved the heavy table so it could be tipped into a barricade. He filled every bucket and barrel. He soaked old sacks in water and stacked them near the walls in case of fire. Clara baked bread. It felt ridiculous, making bread while expecting men with guns. But bread was food, and kneading kept her hands from shaking. Hanie found her punching dough harder than necessary. You will kill it. It's dough. Still, Clara pushed both fists into the soft mass. I am angry. I see at you too. Hanie leaned against the table. Why? Because you are calm. I am not. You look calm. I look like this when I am angry. That is unfair. What face should I make? Clara glared at him. Hanie raised his eyebrows. She laughed despite herself. Then, as quickly as it came, the laughter left. Are you afraid? She asked. Yes, the answer was immediate. Clara stopped kneading. Hanie looked toward the window. Afraid they burn the barn. Afraid cattle run. Afraid you are hit because I stayed. Because you stayed. This began before you. No, Silas made sure it included me. You can still go. Clara's hands sank into the dough. Do you want me to? Hanie was silent too long. Clara looked at him. Finally he said, Want is not the same as choosing for you. She wiped flour from her fingers. I am staying. Hanie nodded. Clara stepped closer. And I need you to stop offering me an escape every time the world becomes dangerous. I know where the door is. His eyes moved to the key lying on the table. Yes, he said. That was almost a joke. Almost. Clara went back to the bread. That night they ate stew from the same pot because neither wanted to wash two bowls. Hanie slept in the loft above the main room with the rifle beside him. Clara slept in her bed fully dressed. Nothing happened. The next day nothing happened either. Waiting became its own kind of siege. Every raven sounded like a boot on gravel. Every branch striking the roof became a rifle stock. Clara found herself opening the flour bin just to touch the oilcloth around the deed. At dusk a rider appeared on the lower road. Clara grabbed the Winchester. It was only a boy from the timber camp. He carried an empty mail pouch and a folded scrap from Martha. Clara tore it open. Martha's handwriting shook across the page. I believe you. Josiah believes enough to be afraid. I sent your letter and copy by express to the federal marshal in Prescott. Silas has been asking who uses the telegraph. Do not trust local deputies. Hold if you can. Clara read it twice. Hanie read it once. How long from Prescott? She asked. 2 days if roads are good, and if they aren't. He folded the letter. Longer. The timber boy looked between them. My foreman says Thorne hired men in Miller's Creek yesterday. How many? Hanie asked. 7, maybe 8. Gideon Vance is leading them. Clara's stomach tightened. Silas too? The boy nodded. They left town after supper. Hanie looked toward the ridge. They come tonight. The boy swallowed. You want me to stay? No, Clara and Hanie said together. The boy fled down the mountain before dark. Hanie brought the horses into the barn and left the corral gate open so loose stock would not be trapped if shooting started. Clara filled lamps but did not light them. They covered the window with a thick blanket. Then there was nothing to do. They sat at the table in darkness. The key lay between them. Clara touched it. I used to sleep with this under my pillow. I know. She looked up. How? You checked it every morning before opening the door. Clara felt foolish, then decided not to. I thought you might take it back. I had another key. Her head snapped up. Hanie's face remained straight. You had another key? To the outside lock, not the bolt. And you never used it? No. Clara stared at him. You could have told me. You would have slept worse. That is true. They sat quietly. Then Clara asked, Why did you give it to me? Hanie rubbed a thumb over a scar on the table. My mother was taken to a mission school when she was a girl. Doors locked from outside. Later soldiers held my father and me in a stockade. Doors locked from outside. He looked at Clara. I will not make a home that way. The simple statement cut deeper than any declaration could have. Clara reached across the table. She placed her hand over his. Hanie did not move. Neither did she. His hand was rough and warm beneath hers. After several seconds, Clara withdrew. No apology followed, no embarrassment. Only the sound of wind moving through wet pines. Near midnight, a horse snorted in the barn. Hanie stood. Clara heard it then. A faint metallic click from the tree-line, a rifle lever. The waiting was over. Hanie lifted one finger to his lips. Clara nodded. They had rehearsed what to do. Yet her body seemed not to believe the rehearsal mattered. Her pulse hammered in her ears. The room smelled of cold ashes, flour, gun oil, and the damp wool of the blanket covering the window. Hanie moved toward the ladder. Before climbing, he pointed to the place beside the stone hearth where the logs were thickest. Clara shook her head. He frowned. She picked up the Winchester and moved to the door instead. Hanie stared at her. Clara mouthed, I know. Months earlier she would have hidden because a man told her to. Now she took cover because the wall was thick and because Hanie was right about bullets. The difference mattered. He climbed into the loft. The first voice came from outside just before 1 in the morning. Clara Bennett, Gideon Vance. His call traveled through the wet trees. Clara stayed still. Clara, we know you're in there. Territorial authority has received credible information that you're being held against your will. Clara looked up at the loft. Hanie had disappeared into shadow. Vance continued. We've come to take you home. Walk out alone and nobody needs to get hurt. Clara almost laughed. The word home sounded obscene in his mouth. Silas's voice followed, smoother and farther back. Clara, be sensible. Whatever fear you have of Ironcloud, you need not protect him. The agreement is void if coercion can be established. Clara put her forehead against the cool log beside the door. Coercion. The man who had used her father's debt to force her into marriage now arrived with armed men to save her from coercion. Her laugh escaped before she could stop it. Outside, silence. Clara? Silas called. She raised her voice. I am not being held here. Someone muttered beyond the trees. Vance shouted, We know what he's done to you. What has he done? Another pause. Vance had not expected questions. He has isolated you, prevented you from leaving, taken control of the settlement property. Clara looked at the key on the table. He gave me the key to the house the first day I came. That proves nothing. He slept in the barn for half the winter. Silas cut in. Clara, you are confused by dependency. It happens in captivity. This time Clara did laugh. It came out harsher than she intended. You should hear yourself. A shot cracked from the tree line. The bullet struck the cabin wall near the roof. The laughter stopped. Hanie's rifle answered once. A man cursed outside. Then the meadow erupted. Gunfire hammered the cabin from 3 directions. Lead struck logs with heavy thuds. The covered window shattered inward. Glass scattered across the floor beneath the blanket. Clara dropped behind the hearth. Her hands shook when she worked the lever of the Winchester. She forced herself to breathe. Hanie had taught her to count before shooting. See, choose, breathe, fire. A shadow moved near the woodpile. Clara fired. The rifle kicked into her bruised shoulder. The shadow dropped out of sight. She did not know whether she hit a man or frightened him. Hanie fired from the loft. His shots came slower than the attacker's shots. One. Wait, another. He conserved ammunition and made every muzzle flash from the tree line pay for revealing itself. Vance shouted orders. Silas kept calling Clara's name as if that could turn the siege into a rescue. A bullet punched through the door at chest height and buried itself in the far wall. Clara stared at the hole, the door, the same door she had once feared Hanie might open. Now men who called themselves civilized were shooting through it. Outside, a horse screamed. Hanie moved above her. A moment later, he dropped from the loft. Barn, he said. Clara knew what he meant. The horses, flames had not started, but panicked animals could break legs in stalls. You cannot go out. They burn if fire comes. There is no fire yet. There will be. Hanie moved toward the rear door. Clara caught his sleeve. No. He looked at her hand on his arm. She did not release him. We prepared for this. The barn door is open. The lower stall latches are loose. If they smell smoke, they can push out. Hanie hesitated. A shot struck the stone chimney. Clara tightened her grip. Do not die saving horses, we already gave a way out. He looked at her. Then he nodded. It was a small victory, but it mattered. Hanie had spent his life measuring his worth by what he could hold together with his hands. Clara had learned the same bad habit in another form. Sometimes survival required trusting work already done. They returned to position. After 10 minutes, shooting slowed. After 20, it stopped. The silence was worse. Clara's ears rang. She smelled powder and broken pine. Hanie signaled toward the back wall. Movement. A boot scraped beneath the rear window. Clara crouched low, the latch lifted from outside. Someone had a pry bar. The door shuddered. Once. Twice. Hanie stood to one side with his rifle raised. Clara picked up the iron poker from the stove. On the third strike, the wood cracked. A hand appeared through the split. Clara brought the poker down. A man yelled and jerked away. Hanie fired through the opening, deliberately high. The attacker scattered. Clara looked at him. You missed. Yes, you meant to. Yes. Why? He will tell the others the door fights back. Despite everything, Clara grinned. Hanie almost did too. The next attack came from the front. Gideon used the woodpile as cover and sent 2 men crawling toward the porch. Clara saw one through a crack beside the shutter. She tapped the wall with the butt of the rifle. Once. Hanie answered from above. 2 taps, he had the left man. Clara watched the right. He came within 10 feet of the steps carrying rope. Rope, she thought, not a warrant, not papers, rope. She fired into the dirt 6 inches from his hand. Mud jumped into his face. The man rolled behind the porch post. Next one is higher, Clara shouted. Clara, Silas called. They are trying to reach you. They are carrying rope. It is for Ironcloud. Clara stared at the wall. Silas could not hear himself. Or worse, he could. Hanie fired from the loft. The man by the porch scrambled backward. The quiet returned. Time lost shape. The lamp stayed dark. The stove died. Cold entered through the broken window. Clara's fingers stiffened around the rifle. Around 3 in the morning, Hanie came down. He had a cut along his temple where flying wood had struck him. Clara touched it before thinking. He went still. "Splinter," she said. "I know. You are bleeding. I know that too." She pulled a clean cloth from her pocket and pressed it to the cut. Hanie's eyes stayed on hers. The intimacy of tending a small wound in the middle of gunfire felt stranger than the gunfire. Clara removed the cloth. "Hold that." He took it. Neither spoke of the touch. Outside, Silas began talking again. He said the federal government would never recognize an Apache claim over a territorial treaty. He said Hanie would hang for resisting officers. He said Clara could still save herself. Then he said something that made Hanie's face change. "Your father knew when to accept reality, Ironcloud. It is a pity you inherited his stubbornness, but not his sense." Hanie moved toward the window. Clara stepped in front of him. "What does he mean?" Hanie's jaw tightened. "My father died after a tax arrest." Silas's voice carried through the wall. "Old men fall from horses. Tragic things happen." Clara understood, perhaps not enough to prove, enough to wound. Hanie lifted the rifle. Clara put both hands around the barrel and pushed it down. "No." His eyes were black with fury. "He wants you outside." Hanie did not move. "Look at me." His gaze found hers. "You said they would use me to move you. Do not let him use your father." For several seconds, Clara did not know whether he would listen. Then his grip loosened. Silas kept talking. They stopped answering. Near 4, the smell changed. Clara noticed it before seeing light. Tar, burning pitch. Her stomach dropped. "Hanie." He was already moving. Orange light flickered beneath the west wall. A torch had landed against stacked kindling under the eaves. Smoke pushed through the chinking. Clara grabbed a water bucket. Hanie lifted another. Shots cracked the moment he opened the door 2 inches. He slammed it shut. "They wait for us to run," Clara said. Hanie looked toward the roof. The fire crackled louder. They had stacked wet sacks for this. Clara dragged one across the floor and shoved it against the inside wall where heat was building. Steam rose. Hanie climbed halfway into the loft to check the roof line, then came down. Porch corner. How bad? Soon bad. Clara filled another bucket from the indoor barrel. "We open together." "No. Yes. You stay back." "I cannot throw water through your spine." Hanie stared at her. Another piece of wood popped outside. Clara lifted the bucket. On 3, he cursed softly in Apache. "I assume that means yes." Hanie cracked the door. A volley struck the frame. Clara stayed low behind him and threw water toward the burning corner. Flames hissed. They shut the door, again. This time Hanie threw while Clara held the lower edge of the door with both hands. A bullet tore through his sleeve without touching skin. Again. Smoke filled the entry. Clara coughed until she gagged. Hanie wrapped a wet cloth around her mouth. "Breathe through that." "You?" He tied another around his own face. They worked buckets, door, shots, water, shut. The rhythm became mechanical. On the 5th trip, a bullet struck the doorframe and drove a splinter into Hanie's cheek. Blood ran along his jaw. He did not stop. On the 6th, the porch roof caught. Flames spread beneath dry shingles faster than water could reach them. Clara looked at the ceiling. If the porch falls, the door jams. Hanie nodded. They had to put it out now. Clara filled the largest bucket. "I'll go." "No, you cover." "No, Hanie." He took the bucket from her. Clara grabbed it back. For one absurd second, they wrestled over a water bucket while hired guns waited outside. Then, Hanie released it. He opened the door and stepped into the frame. Not out onto the porch. Into the frame. His body blocked Clara from the tree line. "Now," he said. Clara threw the water over his shoulder. Gunfire erupted. Wood jumped beside Hanie's head. He did not move. Clara dropped behind, while Hanie shut the door. "You are an idiot," she gasped. "Yes. Do not agree with me." Another bucket. The final flames died into black steam. Smoke curled from the porch roof, but the fire did not spread. Inside, Clara and Hanie collapsed against opposite walls. They had half a barrel of water left. Hanie's cheek bled. His sleeve was torn. Clara's hair smelled burned. The cabin walls were wet and blackened near the west corner. But they were standing outside. No one fired. The attackers had expected fire to force them out. Now they were deciding what came next. "They won't stop," Hanie said. It was the longest sentence he had spoken all night. Clara wiped soot from her eyes. No. She looked at the flour bin. The deed was not there anymore. She had moved it into an inner pocket of her skirt before the first shot. Martha had a copy. Federal marshals had been warned, but the men outside did not know any of that for certain. Clara stood. Hanie watched her reach beneath her skirt and pull out the oilcloth. What are you doing? Changing what this fight is about. It is already about land. To us. Not to the men Silas hired. Clara unwrapped the deed. The parchment looked pale in the dark room. Some of them believe they're enforcing a treaty. Some believe I'm a hostage. Some are just being paid. If they see what he is hiding, maybe they stop being one group. Hanie stood. Too dangerous at door. Clara looked at him. Then stand beside me. His expression tightened. Not in front of me. A pause. Then Hanie nodded. Clara took the kitchen knife from the table. She unlocked the door. For the first time that night, the small sound of the key turning seemed louder than gunfire. Hanie stood to her left with the rifle. Clara opened the door only as far as the inside wall gave cover. Cold smoke rolled in. Silas Thorne, she shouted. No answer. She stepped far enough to be seen. Hanie moved with her, beside her as promised. Clara pressed the deed against the outside face of the door and drove the kitchen knife through its blank margin into the timber. The blade sank with a hard wooden knock. Look at this. Shapes shifted in the trees. This is the High Meadow deed. It was filed in 1865. It names Hanie Ironcloud's father and records succession to Hanie. It predates your treaty by 13 years. Silas emerged behind a boulder. Even in the dark, Clara could see the pale shape of his face. You don't know what you're reading. I copied it. It is invalid. Then why did you hide it? A murmur moved through the men near the tree line. Silas stepped farther into view. Clara, go inside. No, that paper is a relic. It has no standing. Good. Then you will not mind federal marshals seeing it. Silas stopped. Clara saw Gideon turn his head. There, that was the crack. She drove into it. A copy is already on its way to Prescott. So is a letter describing the poison you gave me. Silas's voice sharpened. You stupid girl. The insult did more than any legal argument. Every man heard it. Not rescued woman, not concerned citizen, stupid girl. Clara held up the blue vial. I kept this too. Gideon stepped out from behind the trees. Silas spun toward him. Get back in position. Vance ignored him. You said the woman asked for removal. She is compromised. You said Ironcloud threatened her. He has. Clara raised her voice. Hanie has never struck me, threatened me, locked me in, or taken that key from my hand. Silas forced the marriage. Silas offered poison. Silas came tonight with men and torches. Gideon looked toward the blackened porch corner. Silas said, she is repeating what she has been told. Clara felt Hanie beside her. He did not speak. He let her words stand as her own. Gideon's gaze settled on that too. A hired man near the ridge shouted, You said no federal trouble. Silas snapped, There is no federal trouble. From far below the meadow came the faint sound of horses. Everyone heard it. Silas went still. Hanie's eyes lifted toward the trail. Clara's knees nearly gave way. Hoofbeats. Several riders. Steady, not hurried. Hanie raised the rifle. Gideon raised his pistol toward Silas. Easy. For one suspended second, the entire meadow balanced on three men's hands. Silas slowly withdrew not a weapon, but folded papers. The treaty. He held it up. I have lawful authority. Gideon's mouth twisted. Then maybe you'll get to explain it. The riders reached the lower clearing. A voice called through the darkness. Federal marshal. Weapons down. No one moved at first. Then one of Gideon's men dropped his rifle. It landed in mud. Another followed. Gideon holstered his pistol. Silas remained standing with the treaty in his hand. The night, which had belonged to him only an hour earlier, was ending. The federal party entered the clearing without drama. 5 riders came up the trail, coats dark with mist, badges barely visible in the weak light before dawn. Their horses were blown from the climb. One rider led a spare animal loaded with bedrolls and a locked document case. The man in front swung down stiffly. Deputy Marshal Eli Mercer, he called. Who is Silas Thorne? For the first time since Clara had known him, Silas looked like an ordinary man, not a secretary, not a broker, not the voice of a government office, just a tired, wet man standing in mud with paper in his hand. He lifted his chin. I am Territorial Secretary Thorne, and you are interfering with a lawful enforcement action. Mercer looked at the bullet holes in the cabin, then at the scorched porch, then at the armed men emerging from the pines. What were you enforcing? A hostage recovery under the 10th parallel settlement. Mercer removed his gloves. Funny. Our telegram says attempted land fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. and misuse of territorial officers. Silas's face tightened. From whom? Reverend Josiah Miller, his wife, a postal clerk in Cottonwood, and a woman named Clara Bennett. Clara stepped down from the doorway. Her knees shook once she was moving. During the shooting, she had not felt cold. Now it found every wet seam in her clothing. Mercer tipped his hat. Mrs. Bennett, Clara is fine. He looked at Hanie. And you are Hanie Ironcloud. Hanie nodded. Silas cut in. Marshal, the man is armed. So are half the people in this clearing. He fired on authorized personnel. Gideon Vance made a sound like a cough. Mercer turned. You Gideon Vance? Yes. Were you deputized? Gideon looked at Silas. Silas said he was acting under my authority. That wasn't my question. Gideon rubbed rain from his mustache. No federal commission. No county commission either. Silas stared at him. Gideon, you paid me as private security. You understood the territorial necessity. I understood $20 a day and a woman who wanted out. His pale eyes shifted to Clara. She doesn't look like she wants out. One of the hired men swore under his breath. Silas's control finally cracked. You ignorant fools, do you have any idea what is at stake? The rail line will move south if that pass is not secured. Mills, freight, contracts, hundreds of jobs, gone. All because one obsolete deed and one obstinate rancher are allowed to stop an entire territory. The clearing went quiet. There was the truth, Clara thought. Not peace, not civilization. Money moving through a pass. Mercer looked toward the deed pinned to the cabin door. Take that down carefully. Hanie pulled the kitchen knife free. The parchment fluttered once in the wind. He gave it to Clara rather than the marshal. The gesture did not escape Mercer. Clara carried the deed down the steps. Mercer unfolded it beneath a lantern held by one of his deputies. He read slowly. Silas spoke before the marshal finished. That document was superseded. Mercer ignored him. The seal looks right. It isn't. The filing number? Meaningless. Mercer opened the locked document case from the spare horse. From inside, he removed several telegrams and a folded registry sheet. We wired the old land office before coming. Silas's face lost color. Mercer read from the sheet. Claim number 417, recorded October 17, 1865. Grantee, Taza Ironcloud, with succession noted to surviving son Hanie Ironcloud. Survey amended 1868, no cancellation recorded. Hanie closed his eyes for 1 second. Clara had not understood until then how much of him had expected the paper to fail simply because men like Silas needed it to. Mercer looked at him. Your father's filing is in the registry. Hanie's voice was rough. I was told the registry burned. One ledger did. The index copy did not. Silas stepped forward. This proves nothing. The later settlement governs use, taxation, and public access. Mercer turned to Clara. She took it from her pocket. Silas moved quickly, not toward Clara, toward the deed. His hand closed on one edge and tore it from Mercer's grasp. Hanie took a step. The deputies drew weapons. Stop, Mercer shouted. Silas backed away holding the parchment. His expression had become wild. You think paper makes truth? I can produce 6 papers by noon that say the opposite. He reached for his match case. Clara almost pitied him. Almost. He struck a match. Wind killed it. He struck another, cupping both hands. The flame caught, a tiny yellow tongue in the gray morning. Silas lowered it toward the deed. A drop of water fell from the eave onto his hand. He jerked. The match landed in the mud and hissed out. Silas stared at it. Gideon laughed once. It was not a kind sound. Silas tried again. Mercer crossed the distance and took him by the wrist. The deed slipped from Silas's fingers. Clara caught it before it touched the ground. Mercer turned Silas around and snapped iron cuffs onto his wrists. The click carried across the clearing. Clara remembered another metallic sound. The bolt on the cabin door the first night Hanie had walked away. That sound had given her privacy. This one took Silas's power. Both were small sounds. Both changed a life. Silas twisted in Mercer's grip. You cannot arrest a territorial secretary based on a woman's tale and a native deed. Mercer's expression did not change. I'm arresting you based on enough evidence to take you to a judge. What the judge does is the judge's problem. I know the judges. I expect you do. Silas looked at Clara. Hatred sharpened his features. I saved your father. No, Clara said. You bought his debt. I gave you a place in history. You gave me to a man you intended to kill. Silas leaned toward her as far as the marshal allowed. You think he will make you happy? You think this mountain is freedom? Winter will come again. Children will come. Work will bend you until you look 50 at 30. You could have had a house in town, servants, music silk. Clara looked down at her blackened skirt and soot-streaked hands. The image Silas offered was not entirely ugly. That was why his kind of cage worked. Warm rooms, polished floors, someone else hauling water, a piano by a clean window. There were mornings on High Meadow when Clara would have traded a good deal for a bath she did not have to carry in buckets. But Silas had made the mistake of describing comfort as if it were the same as freedom. "I might want silk someday," she said. "If I do, I'll buy it myself." Gideon looked down to hide a smile. Mercer led Silas toward a horse. The hired men surrendered their weapons one at a time. No one had died. One man had a bullet through the fleshy part of his arm. Another had Clara's poker mark across 2 knuckles. Hanie's deliberate shooting, Gideon's hesitation, and darkness had spared them a body count that would have made law much harder to untangle. As dawn opened over the ridge, the meadow looked terrible. Mud covered the yard. The west side of the porch was charred. One window was gone. 3 logs had deep bullet scars. A fence rail lay split near the corral. The barn still stood. The horses had pushed into the open paddock during the shooting and now watched the strangers with offended suspicion. The red heifer's calf bawled for breakfast. Life resumed before anyone gave permission. Mercer took statements at the table. Clara sat where Silas had placed the poison hours earlier. Hanie stood near the stove, unwilling to sit while strangers occupied the room. Mercer asked Clara about the wedding. She described the debt, the threat to seize her father's ranch, the treaty, the gold, and the ride north. "Did Ironcloud ever tell you that you couldn't leave?" "No." "Did he ever lock you in?" "No." "Take your money?" "I had none." Mercer glanced at her. "Did he keep you from obtaining any?" "No." "Force marital relations?" Clara's face grew hot. Hanie looked toward the wall. "No." Mercer's pen paused. "Did you share a bed?" "That has nothing to do with the land deed." "It may have something to do with whether the marriage was consummated under territorial law." Clara's jaw tightened. "No." Mercer nodded and wrote it down without comment. Hanie's shoulders remained rigid. Clara understood then that even help could feel invasive. Law wanted facts. Facts lived inside bodies and rooms. There was no clean way to extract them. When Mercer questioned Hanie, the questions changed. Did he know of the deed? When had he last seen it? Who told him the registry burned? What tax notices had he received? Had Silas ever offered purchase money? Hanie answered each one. Then Mercer asked, "Why agree to marry her?" Hanie looked at Clara. "Because I was told she chose it." Mercer stopped writing. "And when you discovered she had not?" "I gave her the house." "The whole house?" "Yes." "Where did you live?" "Barn." Mercer looked around the room. "For how long?" Clara answered before Hanie could. "Until the blizzard nearly killed him." One deputy near the door shifted his weight. Mercer dipped his pen. "What happened then?" "I opened the door." The marshal looked at her. Clara met his gaze. "I opened it." He seemed to understand that the sentence contained more than weather. He wrote for another hour. Before leaving, Mercer took the poison vial, the copied correspondence from Martha, and Silas's treaty copy. The original deed remained with Hanie after the marshal made a witness transcription. "You may be called to Prescott," Mercer said. Hanie's expression hardened. "To prove what is already mine. To keep it from being taken again." Hanie said nothing. Mercer mounted. He looked at Clara. "Mrs. Bennett, given the circumstances, a court may find the marriage void from the beginning." Clara felt the words somewhere low in her stomach. Beside her, Hanie did not move. Mercer continued. "If that's what you want, make it clear when you give testimony. No one should bind you to a contract obtained through threat." "Thank you." The marshal tipped his hat. They rode away with Silas and 2 of the hired men who had outstanding warrants. Gideon was ordered to appear for testimony and left on his own horse after helping one wounded man into the saddle. Before he went, Gideon stopped near the porch. He looked at Hanie. "You could have killed 3 of us." Hanie said nothing. Gideon looked at Clara. "So could you. I was busy protecting my bread pans." Gideon laughed, then his expression sobered. "He lied to me." Clara looked at the burn mark on the porch. "You wanted to believe him." Gideon took that without argument. Probably he rode away. The clearing fell quiet. Real quiet this time. No hidden rifles. No men waiting below the ridge. Just dripping snowmelt, cattle, and wind moving through damaged shingles. Clara stood on the porch beside Hanie. Their shoulders almost touched. The sky turned gold behind the eastern peaks. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Hanie said, "Marriage can end." Clara looked at him. He kept his eyes on the trail. The marshal said, "I heard, you should choose." Clara's first response was irritation. "I have been awake all night, shot at, smoked like a ham, and questioned about my bed by a federal officer. Could I choose after coffee? Hanie blinked. Yes. She went inside. Behind her, she heard him laugh. The legal matter took 6 weeks. Spring fully arrived while papers traveled between Prescott, Tucson, and Washington. Snow disappeared from the lower pasture. Grass returned in thin green blades. Clara planted onions beside the cabin because onions, unlike territorial governments, usually behaved according to known rules. The porch had to be rebuilt. Hanie cut away charred boards, while Clara pulled bent nails and straightened the usable ones with a hammer. They replaced the broken window with oiled cloth until new glass could arrive. At night they slept under the same roof, still apart. The absence of danger did not suddenly make them husband and wife in the private sense. Clara was grateful for that. Gratitude was not love. Shared gunfire was not consent. A winter of trust did not erase the day she had been forced into a dress. They let the relationship remain unnamed. That, too, was a choice. A letter came from her father in April. Clara recognized his handwriting before opening it. She carried it to the creek and sat on a flat stone. Edwin wrote 3 pages. He apologized badly. He blamed debt, then blamed Silas, then crossed out half a paragraph and finally wrote the sentence Clara had needed months earlier. I was afraid to lose my land, and I chose to risk losing you instead. Clara read that line many times. At the bottom he asked whether she could forgive him. She folded the letter and carried it home. Hanie was repairing a harness at the table. Bad news? He asked. My father has discovered honesty, dangerous illness. Maybe fatal. Hanie's mouth curved. Clara put the letter in the stove. Then she took it out before the flame caught. Hanie watched without comment. I am not ready to forgive him, she said. Then don't. I might later. Then later. She placed the letter in a drawer. The answer was so simple that Clara felt tears threaten. She hated crying in daylight and went outside to weed onions. In May, Mercer returned with court papers. He came alone this time and accepted coffee at the table. Silas had been removed from office pending trial. Investigators found railroad shares held under the name of his brother-in-law, forged tax notices, and payments to 2 local officials. The High Meadow deed had been recognized as valid. The 10th parallel settlement, at least the clauses used to control the ranch, had been suspended. And the marriage? Clara asked. Mercer slid a paper across the table. Voidable at your request. The judge agrees your consent was obtained under economic duress and material misrepresentation. You can sign this and be Clara Bennett again in the eyes of the territory. The paper waited between her and Hanie. Hanie stood. I will check horses. Clara looked up. You don't have to leave. Yes. He put on his hat and went outside. Mercer pretended to become fascinated by his coffee. Clara read the document. It was clear, almost generous. She could end the marriage with one signature. The Bennett name could be hers without Silas's conditions. She could sell nothing because Hanie's land would remain Hanie's. She could leave with no debt attached to her. Mercer even had authority to escort her to town if she wished. For the first time, freedom appeared not as a key, a promise, or a narrow choice between bad outcomes. It was a road, open. Clara set down the paper. Can I sign later? Mercer nodded. You have 30 days under the order. I can leave a copy. I want to go to town. Mercer glanced toward the window. Today? Yes. Hanie saddled Clara's horse without asking why. He tightened the cinch, checked the shoes, and tied a bedroll behind the saddle. You need money, he said. He held out a small leather purse. Clara did not take it. I have money from egg sales. $4.30, rich. I have survived on less. Hanie held the purse out. Clara accepted it because refusing help to prove independence was another kind of foolish pride. When will you return? He asked. I don't know. Hanie nodded. No argument. No question about whether she planned to sign the annulment. He handed her the reins. The iron key was still in her pocket. Clara rode down the mountain alone. The trip to High Meadow Town took most of the day. Everything looked smaller than she remembered. The land office had a new temporary administrator. Silas's name had been scraped from the painted window, leaving a pale rectangle in the dust. People stared at Clara when she walked along the boardwalk. Some greeted her. Some looked away. Martha Miller came running from the chapel and wrapped both arms around her. Clara stiffened, then returned the embrace. You got my letter, Clara said. Martha pulled back, crying openly. I was so afraid it was too late. It nearly was. Reverend Miller approached from the chapel door. He looked older. He removed his hat. Clara, I owe you an apology. Yes. The Reverend seemed startled that she agreed. Clara waited. He swallowed. I told myself the agreement would save lives. I told myself your father consented, and you did not openly refuse, and that I was merely performing a legal duty. I knew better. Clara looked at the man who had pronounced her married while refusing to meet her eyes. What will you do with knowing better now? Reverend Miller's face tightened. I testified. That is a start. She left him with that. Clara visited her father's old ranch. A new family lived there. Children had hung shirts on the fence to dry. A woman she did not know was planting beans near the kitchen. The barn roof had been repaired. Clara sat on her horse at the road and expected grief to split her open. Instead, she felt a quiet sadness and then, unexpectedly, relief. The ranch had been the center of every decision in her father's life. It had been used to price her. Now it was simply a house belonging to strangers. She turned north before sunset. Martha had offered a bed. Clara declined. She camped beside the trail instead. That mattered to her. No locked guest room, no borrowed dress waiting in a wardrobe, no one deciding what morning meant. She made coffee badly over a small fire and slept beneath the stars. At dawn, she took the annulment paper from her saddlebag. She read it once more. Then she folded it and continued up the mountain. Hanie was repairing the north fence when she returned the next afternoon. He saw her from a quarter-mile away. He did not wave, but he stood very still until she reached the yard. Clara dismounted. You were gone 2 days, he said. Yes, you eat? Yes, horse limp? No. He nodded. Clara pulled the annulment paper from her saddlebag. Hanie looked at it. She held it out. He did not take it. I did not sign. His face revealed nothing. Clara became annoyed. You could say something. What? I don't know. Something. Hanie looked toward the cabin. Why did you not sign? There. The right question. Clara thought carefully. Not because of the treaty. Not because I owe you for winter. Not because we were shot at together. Not because I have nowhere else. Hanie waited. I went down to see whether I had somewhere else. And? I do. His jaw tightened slightly. Clara stepped closer. I could teach in town. Martha says the school needs someone. I could go to Tucson. I could probably make my father miserable by living with my aunt. Hanie almost smiled. I have choices. Yes, I came back. The wind moved through spring grass between them. Hanie looked at the paper in her hand. The marriage is still from Silas. Yes, I do not want it from him. Neither do I. Clara tore the annulment paper in half. Hanie's eyebrows rose. That was official. I can request another copy. Then why tear it? Because I have spent months being careful with papermen gave me. She tore it again. The pieces fluttered into the grass. Hanie watched them. Clara drew a breath. If we remain married, I want it to be because we choose it now. Not because Reverend Miller said words in the mud. Hanie looked at her for a long time. Then he asked, what does choosing it require? Clara had not planned beyond the speech. I suppose we decide. Now? Yes, he considered. I choose. Clara stared at him. That is all? You wanted more paper? She laughed. No. Hanie stepped closer, then stopped at the familiar distance he had kept since the wedding. Clara. Yes? May I kiss you? The question struck her harder than if he had simply done it. She looked at his face, the scar on his cheek, the faint white line where the splinter from the siege had healed. Yes. Hanie kissed her carefully. No ownership, no performance, no witness. His hand rested against her shoulder, only after she leaned toward him. The kiss was brief. When they separated, Clara's heart beat faster than it had during parts of the gunfight, which irritated her enough to make her laugh again. Hanie smiled. What? Nothing. That is another lie. Yes, they walked toward the cabin together. At the porch, Clara stopped. The old key was in her pocket. She pulled it out. The iron had polished smooth where months of her fingers had touched it. Hanie looked at the key. You keep it, he said. I know. Clara turned toward the ravine beyond the meadow. She walked to the edge where pines fell away into green shadow. Hanie followed but stayed several steps behind. Clara held the key in her palm. It had protected her when she needed protection. She would never mock that need. Fear had not been weakness. The lock had not been shameful. A boundary was not a failure of trust. But the key no longer meant the same thing. She had gone to town and returned without anyone making her. She had stood in a court order that offered release and chosen her own direction. She had opened the cabin door during a blizzard, during gunfire, and when she wanted a man to sit at her table. The power had never been in the iron. The iron had simply helped her discover where the power was. Clara drew her arm back and threw. The key flashed once in sunlight. Then it vanished into the ravine. Hanie stared after it. That was a good key. Clara turned slowly. Are you serious? Blacksmith charged me $2. She looked at him in disbelief. He held a straight face for perhaps 3 seconds. Then he laughed. Clara shoved his shoulder. "You might have mentioned that before I threw it. You looked decided." "I was." They returned to the house. That afternoon, Hanie removed the outside lock from the door. They kept the interior bolt. Clara insisted on that. A house still needed boundaries. Only now the bolt belonged to both of them. Years passed in ordinary work. That was the part no territorial report recorded. Silas Thorne went to trial. Newspapers printed his name for a season. Railroad investors denied knowing him. Men who had once eaten at his table discovered they had always suspected something. Gideon Vance testified in exchange for leniency on unrelated charges and left the territory afterward. The rail line eventually took a southern route. High Meadow did not become rich. Hanie and Clara did not become symbols while they were busy living. They became ranchers. They replaced the west wall after termites found it. They lost cattle to drought. They argued about where to dig a new well. Clara taught 4 children from neighboring homesteads at the kitchen table 2 days a week, then 6, then 12, until Hanie built a one-room schoolhouse near the lower road. They had a daughter in 1881. Clara nearly died giving birth and spent 3 months furious at everyone who suggested motherhood was naturally gentle. Hanie walked the baby at night because Clara's body needed sleep more than tradition needed obedience. 2 sons followed over the next 7 years. One loved horses. One hated them and preferred books. Their daughter grew up believing the Winchester above the mantel belonged to her mother because, in every meaningful sense, it did. Edwin Bennett visited once. He came in a wagon with his hat in both hands. Clara saw him from the porch and became 22 again for half a heartbeat. Then her daughter ran past her chasing a chicken, and the old fear lost its grip. Edwin apologized without excuses this time. Clara did not tell him everything was forgiven. She made coffee. He stayed for supper. That was enough for one day. He returned the next year. Forgiveness, Clara learned, looked less like opening a gate and more like repairing a fence post by post. Some sections never became new wood. They held anyway. The original High Meadow deed was framed after the final appeal ended. Hanie disliked the frame. "Paper should be stored flat," he said. Clara hung it on the wall above the desk. Paper should sometimes be forced to watch people ignore it. Hanie admitted the argument had merit. The cabin grew. A second room became 2. Stone replaced part of the original chimney. The porch stretched along the south wall where winter sun could reach it. Yet they kept the first front door even after its lower boards silvered, and the bullet hole near the latch widened with age. There was no outside lock. Inside, the old iron bolt remained. Sometimes Clara slid it shut at night. Sometimes Hanie did. Sometimes they forgot, especially in summer when grandchildren ran in and out carrying grass, frogs, sticks, injured birds, and once an extremely angry snake in a flour sack. 40 years after the morning Silas Thorne rode away in handcuffs, Clara sat on the porch beneath the shade of a roof Hanie had rebuilt twice. Her hair had gone white. Her hands were thick at the knuckles and permanently lined by sun and work. The high meadow grass moved silver-green in the afternoon wind. A boy of 7 crouched near the steps, carving at a piece of cedar with a dull pocket knife. His name was Daniel, their daughter's youngest son. He had Hanie's dark eyes and Clara's habit of arguing with questions before answering them. "What are you making?" Clara asked. "A key." She stopped rocking. Daniel held up a crooked piece of wood with 3 notches cut along one side. "For what?" "My fort. Does your fort have a lock?" "No." Clara smiled. "Then why does it need a key?" Daniel frowned as though she had deliberately become difficult. "So nobody can get in." "But there is no lock. I'll make one." Hanie came around the corner carrying a basket of late apples. He moved more slowly now. The old limp had worsened. His hair, once black, was mostly gray. He set the basket on the porch. "What is he building?" "A lock for a fort that does not yet have a door," Clara said. Hanie considered Daniel's wooden key. "Good planning." Clara gave him a look. "You encourage him too much." "Yes." Daniel ran toward the trees with his key. The screen door banged behind one of the older grandchildren inside. Someone complained that a pie had been cut before supper. A baby began crying in the back room. The dog barked at nothing. High Meadow had become noisy. Clara loved the noise more than she would ever say aloud. Hanie sat in the chair beside her. For a while they watched clouds gather over the western ridge. "Rain tonight," he said. "The horses tell you?" "My knee, less reliable, more painful." Clara looked through the open doorway. The frame deed hung above the desk, its old seal darkened with age. Beneath it stood shelves of books, Blackstone, poetry, school primers, account ledgers, novels Hanie pretended not to read and returned to the shelf in suspiciously different positions. The bullet hole in the door was still visible. The peg where the key once hung remained empty. Clara had sometimes wondered where the iron landed. Maybe it lay between rocks where snowmelt polished it each spring. Maybe rust had eaten it to a red shadow. Maybe some future child would find it and assume it had belonged to a mine gate or a jail. The thought did not trouble her. Objects did not control their stories forever. Daniel came running back from the trees. "Grandmother, what? I need help with the door." Clara looked at Hanie. He leaned back in his chair. "Your fort," he said. "You helped build the school. My knee predicts rain. Your knee predicts laziness." Hanie smiled and closed his eyes. Clara pushed herself up from the rocker. Daniel took her hand. His palm was small, warm, and sticky with apple juice. They crossed the yard together. At the edge of the trees stood a miserable little structure made from old fence boards, 2 wagon slats and a blanket roof. The doorway leaned so badly it could barely be called a rectangle. Daniel pointed proudly. "I need it to close." Clara examined the crooked frame. "Closing is easy," she said. "The hard part is making sure you can open it again." Daniel looked up at her. He did not know why his grandfather, seated on the porch, had suddenly become very still. Clara picked up a fallen board. "Bring me that hammer." The boy ran. Wind moved through the pines. Behind them, the front door of the old cabin stood open to the afternoon, shifting an inch with every breeze, and never once needing permission from the past set.